There's something to be said for completely changing a franchise mid-trilogy, or in the case of Darksiders and its Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, mid-tetralogy. But with everything that went on with Vigil and publisher THQ, if there was ever a good time to do it, now is the time. I am of course talking about Darksiders 3's shift to a more Dark Souls-like mould in its approach to levelling up and losing of souls, risk and reward combat, and the fact that the game loves to punish mistakes. A move that actually seems to fit the game quite well. That's easy for me to say as a bit of a Souls fan, but it's a move that might be hard to stomach if Souls-like games aren't your bag. Darksiders 3 though is probably a more accessible and cinematic version of the popular Japanese genre. Yes, Soulsborne is effectively its own genre these days, and that's not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. Darksiders 3 throws you into the shoes of Third Horseman, Fury, a badass whip-wielding titan who is literally rage personified. In the 15 to 20 hour campaign, players will journey around a sprawling and at times confusing linear/open world of sorts, chasing down these 7 deadly sins and putting an end to their tyranny to restore balance to the piggy in the middle, Earth and its pesky little humans. I know what you're thinking. How can a world be open world and linear at the same time? You're an idiot, Webb. Well, you're wrong. Well, about the first bit anyway, not the second bit. I'd never claimed to be otherwise. The game world is exactly like that of Dark Souls, Bloodborne or The Surge, with plenty of alleyways, multiple routes, small hidden secrets, large open world environments, and lots of shortcut unlocking. That's how it can be both. At this point you might be raising an eyebrow or two at the many comparisons to Dark Souls. Well, there is a reason for that. The changes made to Darksiders 3 effectively make the game a Souls-like now. The list of Souls-like features in Darksiders 3 pretty much confirm what I've been saying. You can only level up at Volgrim by feeding him souls, which is effectively like a bonfire now. If you die, you lose your souls unless you collect them before the next death. Combat is far more timing based and strategic now, meaning you can be punished quite easily for making mistakes. And also, you unlock shortcuts as you traipse around the world. They are the very essence of what makes a Souls-like, and they are all present and correct in Darksiders 3. Anybody not expecting a straight-up Souls-like game though, who is disappointed by these changes, you'll be glad to hear that unlike a Souls game, Darksiders 3 has a pretty strong story with interesting characters and some epic cutscenes. Ooh, burn. It's a pretty spectacular looking game on the high-end consoles too, with some decent voice acting and an epic orchestral score to boot. It's very Darksiders and other elements as well, with puzzles and a Metroidvania-esque world to explore, meaning you can't access certain environments until you have the relevant powers. For the RPG out there, there's even a little RPG in there for you too, continuing the traditions from the previous games. That said, there is a greater emphasis on combat in Darksiders 3 than possibly ever before, and that combat ranges from relatively simple to actually being deceptively deep. Yes, you can probably button mash on the lower levels, definitely not on the harder difficulties though. You'll have to learn them combos and master that time dodge. In terms of difficulty, the talk of Dark Souls is usually enough to put off some suitors, but fear not, that shouldn't be the case with Darksiders 3. Yes, it is harder than Darksiders 2, but the game isn't terribly hard, especially on the normal and easier difficulties. If you want a true Dark Souls experience though, then there's the apocalyptic difficulty to try out, but those who want to enjoy the story, you can do so without the difficulty playing much of a part. And that is what we meant by it being a more accessible Dark Souls game. I should at this point mention that I very much enjoyed my time with Darksiders 3. It's a really well made game that plays up to the Dark Souls crowd a la me, but also offers something to the action-adventure fan if they're so inclined. It does let the player down at times with its shoddy compass, and the fact that it doesn't really explain some things in the game at all. And that's new mechanics we're talking here, not something ridiculously obvious. There's no handhold in here. As is always the case in games like this, the camera can be a little bit finicky too, especially when combat takes place in the tightest corridors imaginable. For a game that has its fair share of platforming as well, it can be a little woeful to say the least. Whether you're talking about the double jump, which is just pitiful, Fury's ability to grab on ledges, or should I say inability, or the grappling mechanic, which has a mind of its own half the bloody time, it's all a bit of a letdown on that front. Technically as well, Darksiders 3 is a little all over the place. When shit is going off, the frame rate has a tendency to drop, which in a game about timing your dodges and managing groups of enemies is ridiculously frustrating. Then there's the load screens. No, not the ones that you see when you load the game up or fast travel, which are stupidly long by the way. We're talking about the brief ones that pop up from time to time and really ruin the fluidity of the experience. The game is prone to crashes too, with weird bugs that saw the game collapse every time I died during a specific boss battle and more. When it works though, it really works, which unfortunately isn't all the time. The frame rate issue specifically can be a real immersion killer, and many times led to my demise. On the whole though, Darksiders 3 in its new shiny Dark Soulsy wrapper is actually an exhilarating experience. The emphasis on combat and the whole risk versus reward mechanics complement the Metroidvania style puzzling and Zelda-like traversal. Sure, there are issues mechanically like the world navigation, the camera and some horrible technical issues at times, but that shouldn't stop you from giving Darksiders 3 a chance.